Skin of the Sinless, Part 5. The holy man rested his claymore against his shoulder and walked over to the crumbled beast. He scanned the chamber to see a vast emptiness, accompanied by the mountain of corpses and himself. The holy man turned to the mountain and spent days climbing it in hope of seeing something from the top he had failed to notice before. He scanned the chamber once again until he felt the bodies under him start to slide down. The holy man staggered on the top of the mountain, trying to catch his footing, but the bodies were being sucked in through the middle and straight down the center of the corpses mountain he stood on. The holy man grasped for anything as he was engulfed by the bodies of the mountain. He was passed through a tunnel of corpses for what felt like hours, maybe days. With his arms stuck above his head, he caught glimpses of the garden chamber as he saw it before and for what it really was. The little girl watched from her swing as more children played in the garden until he could see them no more. The bodies gradually turned into orange sand until he fell into a desert of a chamber from a small hole above. The holy man plummeted below and bounced off the sand as a glass bubble appeared around him. He lay there covered in orange dust until his body healed and a wooden tube grew out of the sand in front of him. He got up and looked around to see a sandstorm hindering his view of the outside of his bubble. Then he looked up to see that he was in the bottom half of an hourglass, bodies and sand falling together to the ground from where he had entered the chamber. The holy man placed his free hand against the bubble and it passed right through. So he walked out altogether. The sandstorm relentlessly ate away at his body as he looked out into the distance. There were hundreds of bubbles spread throughout the chamber, with a large mound of sand on the other side that had large cloth perched on the top and flowing with the wind. He made his way in the direction of the mound, with the sandstorm tearing away at his body. The holy man stopped at one of the bubbles to check what was inside and was greeted with more heresy. There was an engorged man on his hands and knees with his mouth around the wooden tube. The tube was filling him up with an unknown substance that slowly enlarging him before the holy man's eyes. The holy man went to end the man's suffering, but was halted when he tried to enter the man's bubble. The holy man used the tip of his claymore to pierce into the bubble and into the back distended man inside. The man popped and covered the inside of the bubble in his remains as bile continued to flow from the tube left behind. The sandstorm pulsed, shredding a good portion of the holy man's skin, while another sin was added to his body, followed by a tear that turned to mud. The storm was getting worse and making it harder for the holy man to push forward, but he persisted. Sand was pouring out from the bottom of his mask, while he made his way to the next bubble to see a woman residing inside with both of her legs broken. She was still fresh compared to the man in the other bubble he had come across, for she was not bloated like him at all. She looked over to see the holy man standing on the outside of her bubble, with bile falling from her mouth. Her eyes were filled with tears as a new hope was looking over her. She cried out, "Oh, thank the Lord," and was instantly obliterated by another pulse of the storm. As she crawled out to embrace the holy man looked to the mound and watched the cloth get taken up by the sandstorm as remnants of the woman blew from his feet. The holy man continued on to the next bubble to rid another soul trapped in eternal suffering. He was cut off by the cloth riding the sandstorm and presented itself before him. It was a naked man like himself, with a blanket of skin flowing behind him. "Why must you ruin my food?" the skin man asked, standing before the holy man. The holy man stood soundless, with his claymore resting on his shoulder. The skin man continued, "Do you lack a tongue to speak, or do you choose to ignore gluttony?" The holy man stepped towards gluttony with his claymore down at his side and gripping the handle with both hands. "So be it," said gluttony, as he was taken by the sandstorm just in time to evade the holy man's downswing of his blade. Then appeared behind him. The holy man felt his presence and swung his claymore wide, while using the flow of the sandstorm to quicken his swing. As he turned around, gluttony used his excess skin to wrap around and catch the holy man's right arm, lifted his body, then continuously slammed him into the ground before throwing him at another glass bubble. The holy man used his claymore to get to one knee, then tilted the blade back to pierce the bubble behind him and burst another trapped soul. A tear caked with orange sand fell from his eye as another scar appeared on his body. Gluttony was sent into a rage. "Leave my food alone." He charged the holy man and engulfed him in his loose skin. The holy man's arms were bound to his sides as gluttony constricted him, showing an impression of his iron mask on his skin. The holy man's bones cracked and protruded from his skin before gluttony let loose and dropped him to the ground. Gluttony stood next to him and expanded his mouth to the size of the holy man as his jaw lowered to the ground. The holy man's body began fixing itself, with the bones in his right arms snapping back into place first. With his hands still gripping his claymore, he leaned over, making his broken ribs pierce through his lungs, and sliced Gluttony's bottom jaw off. Gluttony recoiled back, retracting his loose skin, and scooped at his lower jaw that had fallen flat in the sand into his jawless mouth. The holy man's body jerked as it mended his bones while rising to his feet. Gluttony wrapped his skin around the holy man's head before he had a chance to fight again, and rode the current of the wind. This time he was dragging the holy man through the sands. This scrubbed away his scarred skin and muscle from his bone, while his claymore dangled behind him. The holy man used all his might to pry himself from gluttony, but not in time before his neck dislocated from his spine. This rendered his body useless for the time being. Gluttony had whipped around and let go of the holy man, making his scoured body skip into the sands. The holy man laid in the sands, waiting for his discombobulated body to regenerate itself. with Gluttony nowhere to be seen. He stared up through the storm at the faint hole in the middle of the hourglass-shaped chamber, watching bodies fall like grains of sand. Those that were dead simply bounced off the sand before settling in. Others that aren't so lucky fall in like himself, but do not have the luxury of regeneration, therefore leaving them battered and broken. The only thing keeping them going was an everlasting source of food. So much suffering. Sand gradually fell in the direction of his feet, catching the holy man's attention. He sat up to see the glass bubbles start to roll down as the decline increased by the second. The holy man rose to his feet and made his way to the closest wall as quickly as he could. But it was fruitless. A glass bubble cascaded down and the holy man dug his feet into the sand before using his claymore to split it in two. The damned soul inside ruptured, covering the holy man in bile and viscera, blocking his vision from seeing the other behind it. Another soul, another scar, and a tear for the damned. The second bubble smashed into the holy man and made him tumble to the ground. He was standing on was now in front of him. He grabbed onto a wooden tube, but it gave with ease, while the rotation of the chamber continued to speed up. The sand made a vortex as it went through the hole and started filling the other half of the hourglass chamber. The holy man let his claymore dangle from his rosary once again. As he landed on a glass bubble, he hugged it to keep himself from sliding off, with his claymore hanging from his side. He balanced himself on top of the hourglass bubble, trying to stay above the orange vortex below. With the cyclone's stand still tearing away at him, the holy man leaped from bubble to bubble until he was able to jump and dig his claymore into the wall of the chamber to hold himself in place until the last of the sand trickled down. He could see Gluttony sitting on the bottom of the other section of the chamber, ingesting all that fell. Gluttony was now an immense mound of flesh that filled up the entire bottom of the hourglass-shaped chamber. His slack skin was no more, and without his jaw, the sand and glass bubbles fell into an abyss. The holy man pushed off the wall with his foot to free his blade and plunged feet first into the lower portion of the chamber where Gluttony fed. He fell with his claymore overhead and brought it down on Gluttony's face. The holy man continued to fall as his blade passed through the disgusting mountain of flesh and severing every organ and bone in its path. The holy man's legs snapped on impact when landing in the mess of sand, viscera, and remains of those left from the glass bubbles that were no more. He sat atop of his crumbled legs as he watched Gluttony spewed blood with every pump of his massive, lacerated heart. The holy man stood as soon as his legs mended themselves and used his blade to cut the arteries holding its heart in place. He then cut open his stomach and placed it inside. He watched as Gluttony's stomach acid boiled over and his heart disintegrated in the sludge. A dirty tear fell from his eye, caked with sand, and the word Gluttony illuminated all over his body and disappeared. He looked at the top of his free hand to see scarless skin for the first time in centuries. The holy man looked down at his feet as he felt the contents of Gluttony's stomach start to eat away at them. Bones were beginning to show, and before he knew it, the ground he stood on opened up. The stomach acid had eaten through Gluttony itself and dropped the holy man into the labyrinth once again. And that's it for tonight, my little hellhounds. Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed tonight's scary story, then why not like the video and subscribe and click the bell icon so you get notified every time I upload. If you have any scary stories, then submit them to Reddit r/homeofscares and follow me on Twitter at homeofscares. Now, good night, my little hellhounds.